Elena Harcourt had always believed in love stories written by fate. When she met Richard Alden at a gallery opening in Bath, it felt like destiny had nudged her into the glow of his gaze. He was everything she thought she had been waiting for. Eloquent, magnetic, and with a smile that made promises too vast to measure. Their courtship was a blur of candle-lit dinners and whispered conversations in quiet corners of the city. Richard knew how to look at her, how to make her feel like she was the only one in the room. Elena, fragile from a life of disappointments, surrendered completely. To her friends, it looked like a fairy tale unfolding at frightening speed. "Are you sure you're not rushing this?" her closest friend Marianne asked gently over coffee one morning. Elena shook her head, her eyes glowing. "When you know, you know. With Richard, it feels like I've been waiting my whole life to breathe properly." Weeks later, the chapel bells rang. Elena's white dress shimmered under soft light, but in the photograph something lingers if you look too closely. Her joy is undeniable, yet Richard's smile, framed in shadow, carries a flicker too controlled, too deliberate. The honeymoon suite, draped in roses and champagne, stood untouched long into the night. Elena stared at the untouched glasses, wondering if exhaustion alone explained the silence pressing between them. Richard had kissed her hand tenderly, whispered that he was tired, and turned away too quickly. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself love was enough, but small cracks have a way of widening. His phone buzzed in the dark, and he silenced it with a sharpness she had never seen before. Elena turned her face toward the window, choosing blindness over doubt. Outside, the moon hung heavy, casting long shadows across the room. The perfect beginning had already begun to rot from within, and Elena could not yet see how dangerous her devotion would become. The first weeks of marriage were a dream Elena clung to tightly, even as the edges began to fray. Richard had a way of making every dinner feel like a performance, candlelight flickering against his perfectly timed laughter. But when the laughter ended, shadows lingered. It began with the phone calls, always late at night, always hushed as though the walls themselves might betray him. Elena would stir in bed, listening to his voice just beyond the door. She could never quite catch the words, only the sharp undertone, the way his sentences ended like snapped strings. One night, she gathered courage. She padded into the hallway, heart hammering, and found him standing by the window, silhouetted against the moonlight. "Richard!" Her voice trembled. He turned too quickly, the phone sliding into his pocket. A smile spread across his face, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just business, love. Go back to sleep." It should have soothed her. Instead, the smile unnerved her. Too perfect, too rehearsed. Days later, over lunch, Marianne leaned in close. "Elena, he's different. Don't you see it?" Elena forced a laugh, clutching her wine glass. "He's busy, that's all. Men in his position always are." But Richard's charm had its limits. The first flash of his temper struck when she asked, too softly, why the calls never stopped. His eyes hardened, and the voice that once whispered endearments cut through her like a blade. "Don't pry into things you don't understand." The silence afterward was worse than the words. Richard smoothed it over with flowers, with apologies spoken in that velvet tone. But something in Elena shifted. The seed of doubt had been planted, no matter how fiercely she tried to bury it. That night, her phone glowed in the dark as she scrolled through old messages, wondering who Richard truly spoke to when the world slept. She told herself love meant trust, but in the silence, trust began to sound a lot like denial. And outside the bedroom, Richard's shadow stretched long against the wall, the faint glow of his hidden phone call flickering like a warning Elena refused to see. Elena told herself she wouldn't snoop. Marriage, she thought, deserved trust, yet the silence that hung between her and Richard each night pressed against her ribs like a stone. His phone calls, his sudden flashes of temper, the way he could shift from warmth to ice in a single breath, it all left her restless, searching. One afternoon, while Richard was away on business, she stepped into his office. The room was immaculate, almost staged. Books aligned too neatly, desk polished to a sheen. But her eyes caught on the bottom drawer, locked, the only one. Her hands trembled as she touched the handle. Something about it felt forbidden, like a door that shouldn't be opened. Yet curiosity became a hunger. gnawing until it felt unbearable. She remembered her father's old trick with a hairpin. Her fingers shook as she slid the pin into the lock, the sound of the click loud in the quiet house. Inside lay papers bound with elastic, faded photographs and scraps of correspondence in handwriting she didn't recognize. She picked up one photograph, her breath catching. Richard stood beside a woman she had never seen before, his arm draped around her waist, his expression colder, sharper. Elena searched the woman's eyes, as if the answer to everything might be hidden there. Among the documents, she found something worse, a driver's license, worn and foreign, bearing Richard's face but not his name. Different identity, different history. Her pulse roared in her ears. She tried to convince herself there must be an explanation, perhaps a mistake, perhaps an old alias for business. Yet dread seeped into her like ink in water. She shoved everything back, locking the drawer with hands that felt no longer her own. But once the truth has been glimpsed, it cannot be unseen. That evening, when Richard kissed her cheek with his practiced tenderness, Elena froze. She wondered whose name he whispered when she wasn't listening. And somewhere, in the shadows of her heart, trust began to decay, replaced by the sickening realization the man she loved might not even exist. The drawer had been locked again, the documents neatly hidden away, but Elena could not erase the memory of what she had seen. For days she walked on eggshells, forcing herself to smile whenever Richard looked her way. Yet guilt clung to her skin like sweat, as though he could sense the trespass without her saying a word. One evening, as the rain hammered against the windows, Richard's voice cut through the quiet. "Why were you in my office, Elena?" Her heart stalled. She tried to feign innocence. "I was dusting." "I didn't. Don't lie to me." His tone was sharp, unrecognizable. She turned, and the man she had married, charming, tender, impossibly attentive, was gone. His eyes had hardened into something glacial, his jaw set like stone. He stepped closer, his shadow stretching long across the room until it swallowed her. "I told you never to touch my things." The words hissed out, low and venomous. For a moment she thought he might strike her. She could feel the violence pulsing beneath his restraint, like a storm pressing against a door. Instead, he slammed his hand against the wall beside her head. She flinched, tears stinging her eyes. Then, as quickly as the rage appeared, it melted into softness. His hand brushed her cheek, tender, too tender. "Darling, I'm sorry. You know how much pressure I'm under." I shouldn't have snapped. His voice was velvet again, persuasive and warm. Elena wanted to scream, to tell him she knew something was wrong, but the guilt wrapped around her tighter than his embrace. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe it is my fault. Later that night, she stood alone in the bathroom, gripping the porcelain sink, mascara streaking down her face. The reflection staring back at her was a stranger, frightened, uncertain, unraveling. Behind her, down the hall, Richard hummed softly as though nothing had happened. His mask perfectly reset, but Elena knew what she had seen. The slip of the mask, the glimpse of the cruelty beneath. And once revealed, she feared it would never stay hidden again. Elena tried to tell herself it was over, that Richard's outburst had been nothing more than stress, an isolated crack in an otherwise perfect life. But the image of his face, twisted in fury, refused to leave her mind. It clung to her, gnawing away at every shred of trust she had left. One afternoon, as rain lashed against the cobblestones, she ducked beneath her umbrella outside a grocer's. That's when a man stepped into her path. His coat was soaked through, his eyes darting like a hunted animal's. "You're Elena." "His wife," the man said, his voice low. "You don't know what he's done." Her stomach lurched. "I think you've mistaken me." "No." The man's hand trembled as he pressed a folded scrap of paper into hers. "Be careful. He isn't who he says he is." And before she could reply, he disappeared into the storm. That night, she stared at the paper under the dim glow of a lamp. A name was scrawled across it. Not Richard Alden, but another entirely. Alongside it was a date 10 years earlier. Her heart thudded painfully as she searched the archives online. The headline made her breath catch. "Local woman found dead. No suspects." The woman's face stared up at her, frozen in black and white tragedy. And there, in the blurred corner of a photograph taken at the funeral, stood Richard. When she confronted him later, her voice shook. "Who is she, Richard?" Why were you there? His smile was brittle, his words smooth. An old friend. You're imagining things, love. You let your mind run away with you. He brushed a strand of hair from her face as though she were a child who needed calming. But Elena could feel it now. The manipulation. The calculated way he twisted truth into something unrecognizable. She lay awake long after he drifted into sleep. The sound of his steady breathing filling the room like a threat. Outside the rain beat on relentless. Somewhere in the past a woman had died, and Elena could no longer ignore the possibility that her husband's hands weren't clean. Sleep became impossible after the newspaper clipping. Elena's mind spiraled through restless nights, haunted by the face of the dead woman and the image of Richard, blurred yet unmistakable, standing nearby. She needed answers, even if the truth shattered everything. While Richard was away on another trip, she returned to his office. The locked drawer surrendered to the same trick as before, but this time she went deeper, rifling past photographs and letters until she found a slim folder buried beneath. Its edges were yellowed, the contents brittle with age. Inside were police records, statements, crime scene notes, even a faded autopsy summary. The name leapt at her, Catherine Morland, deceased, suspicious circumstances, and then written again and again in the margins, Richard Alden, prime suspect. Her vision blurred as she read. Catherine had died under mysterious conditions, her body discovered near the riverbank after a night out. Witnesses placed Richard with her hours before she vanished. Yet the case had been dropped abruptly, citing insufficient evidence. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. The man she had loved so blindly, the man she shared a bed with, had once stood accused of murder. A noise from the hall snapped her back. She shoved the file closed, heart hammering, and turned. The office door stood ajar, though she had locked it behind her. In the gilt-framed mirror on the wall, she caught sight of something that froze her blood. Richard's reflection, half in shadow, watching. His eyes glinted with a coldness she had never seen, as if he already knew. Elena, his voice carried softly into the room, calm but laced with menace. Why do you look so pale? Her throat tightened. She forced a smile, fumbling with papers. Just tired. Richard stepped closer, his presence filling the space. His hand rested briefly on her shoulder, tender, almost loving. But his grip lingered, just enough to remind her how strong he was, how trapped she had become. She whispered an excuse and slipped away, clutching the secret like a wound. But the truth was now carved into her. She was married to a man who might have killed before, and sensed he may kill again. From the moment Richard's cold eyes met hers in the mirror, Elena knew he suspected something. He no longer needed to ask where she had been or what she had done. His control was quieter, more insidious. The first step was isolation. Phone calls to her friends went unanswered, not because they ignored her, but because Richard had begun intercepting them. "Darling, your line's been faulty," he said smoothly, sliding her mobile back across the table. Visits to her family were suddenly inconvenient, blocked by his business trips or fabricated emergencies. The house became a cage, its walls pressing in closer each day. Whenever she tried to assert herself, to say she needed space or time or truth, his mood shifted like a switch. One moment tender, the next sharp as a blade. "You'd be nothing without me," he hissed once, too close, his breath hot against her ear. Then in the same breath, "I don't mean that, love. You know how much you mean to me." It was then Elena realized she was losing herself, that if she didn't act, she would drown in his lies. Quietly, carefully, she bought a small voice recorder and began hiding it during their conversations. At dinner, while Richard sipped his wine and spoke of business, the device blinked silently beneath the tablecloth. Yet Richard had a way of looking at her that suggested he already knew. His smile lingered too long. His pauses stretched into silence as though he were testing her courage. Every glance felt like a trap tightening. One evening, as rain streaked down the glass, Elena pressed her forehead against the cold window pane. Her reflection stared back at her, pale, haunted, almost unrecognizable. Beyond the glass, the world was free, wide, alive. Inside, she was bound to a man who had killed before and might kill again. She whispered into the empty room, "I will not be next." But in the silence, Another thought clawed at her. Richard always stayed one step ahead, and somewhere in the house, she heard the faint click of a door closing, as if he had been listening all along. The storm came without warning. Rain slashed against the windows, the house shuddered under the wind, and the lights flickered until finally they died. Candles were lit, their flames trembling, throwing long, restless shadows across the walls. Elena sat at the dining table, her recorder hidden beneath the cloth, her pulse thrumming in her throat. Richard stood by the window, silent, watching the storm as if it had been summoned just for him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, frayed at the edges. "I know what you've been doing, Elena." Her chest tightened. She forced calm. "Doing?" He turned, face half illuminated, half swallowed in shadow. "Digging into things that don't concern you. Catherine. The drawer. The files. You've seen it all." Her hands went cold. She gripped the phone hidden in her lap but didn't dial. Not yet. Richard stepped closer, his eyes glistening in the candlelight. "I didn't mean to kill her." His words were soft, almost tender. "It was an accident. She pushed, she provoked, and I—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair. "You have to believe me." Elena's lips parted, but no sound came. "You're the only one who could ever understand," he whispered, crouching beside her. His hand rested on hers, gentle, yet his grip tightened until her knuckles whitened. "You love me, don't you? Enough to see past one mistake." Tears burned her eyes. Fear warred with pity, but beneath it all lay the dawning clarity. She was not safe. Catherine had been the first. She could be the next. Richard's face softened again, as though nothing monstrous had passed his lips. "Promise me, Elena. Promise you won't betray me." She swallowed, forcing a nod, her free hand tightening around the phone. In the flickering light, her shadow shook against the wall, while his loomed steady, unyielding. That night, as the storm howled outside, Elena realized she had crossed an invisible line. There was no longer space for doubt. If she stayed silent, she would die. Her trembling thumb hovered over the phone's keypad. The question was not if she should call for help, but whether she could do it before Richard found out. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than thunder. Elena knew she could not wait any longer. The recorder tucked beneath her dresser was filled with Richard's veiled threats, his half-confession. It was enough to prove he was dangerous. With trembling hands, she dialed the authorities from the bathroom, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, it's my husband. He killed someone. He'll kill again. You have to hurry." But even as she spoke, she felt it. The shift in the air, the way the floorboards creaked. Richard was listening. The door swung open. He stood there, eyes burning, jaw rigid. "You called them, didn't you?" Elena's heart stopped. "No." His hand slammed the phone from her grasp, the crash echoing against the tiles. His calm had shattered, replaced by a fury she had only glimpsed before. He dragged her into the hallway, voice a guttural snarl. "You think you can betray me? After everything I've given you?" She fought, nails clawing, feet kicking against the polished wood. For the first time, she saw the mask stripped away entirely. Not charm, not tenderness, only raw violence. In the struggle, she wrenched free, bolting barefoot through the front door. The night air sliced against her skin as she tore across the driveway, heart slamming in her chest. Behind her, Richard's footsteps thundered closer. Then, blue and red lights burst through the darkness. Sirens wailed, tires screeched. Police swarmed, shouting commands lost in the chaos. Richard lunged, but rough hands seized him, forcing him to the ground. Elena collapsed onto the wet pavement, gasping, her body trembling with shock. For a moment, she believed it was over. But as the officers hauled him to his feet, Richard's eyes found hers. His lips curled into that same practiced smile, chilling in its serenity. "This isn't finished, Elena," he murmured, just loud enough for her to hear. And in that instant, even with police surrounding her, she understood the truth. Some prisons are made of bars, but others live in the mind, and Richard still held the key. The courtroom was silent, save for the shuffle of papers and the hollow ticking of the clock. Richard sat in the dock, stripped of his tailored suits, stripped of his charm. Yet even in chains, he carried himself with a predator's poise, eyes fixed on Elena as though daring her to look away. Witnesses came and went. Old acquaintances recounted lies, deceptions, and the shadowy gaps in his past. Police officers detailed the long-buried investigation into the woman's death, a case that had been smothered by lack of evidence, until Elena forced it back into the light. At last, the evidence spoke louder than Richard's charisma ever could. The verdict was read, the gavel struck, and the mask that had once bewitched her shattered before everyone's eyes. Elena sat frozen. Her hands trembled in her lap, not from victory, but from the realization that she had built her love upon a phantom. The man she had married, the man she had defended, the man she had lain beside at night had never truly existed. He was nothing more than an invention, a beautiful lie stitched together by secrets and control. As the guards led him away, Richard turned one final time. A faint smirk tugged at his lips, almost imperceptible, but enough to pierce her like a blade. She would never know whether it was defiance or a reminder that she had only glimpsed part of the monster. The documentary ends not with closure, but with emptiness. The camera lingers on an empty courtroom chair, stark under the fluorescent lights, the ghost of his presence still palpable. Then it cuts to Elena, walking alone across a dimly lit bridge. The night air carries the weight of freedom, but her shoulders remain bowed beneath invisible chains. A narrator's voice asks the final, haunting question. Did she ever truly know Richard Whitcomb, or was she only ever in love with the mask he wore? The screen fades to black, leaving the audience with the silence of a truth too sharp to forget.